Have you ever been humiliated by your own family, right in front of everyone you love? I have, and it happened on the happiest day of my life. I still remember every sound, every look, every whisper that echoed across that golden hall. My name is Margaret, and that day was supposed to be my fresh start. The day I finally let love back into my life after 15 long years of being alone. The hall was glowing with soft lights and laughter. White roses, gold ribbons, and crystal chandeliers, it all looked like a scene from a fairy tale. Guests were dressed in their best, and the air smelled of jasmine and champagne. I was wearing a simple champagne-colored gown, nothing too fancy, but it made me feel beautiful again. My heart was pounding, not from nerves, but from joy. I was about to marry Edward, a kind, humble man who had brought warmth back into my cold, lonely world. Edward wasn't rich, at least that's what everyone believed. He lived in a quiet little apartment, drove an old car that sometimes coughed smoke, and wore the same gray suit he had owned for years. But oh, when he smiled, that smile carried the calm of a man who had lived, lost, and still chosen love again. He wasn't perfect, but to me, he was peace. Everything felt magical, until I heard it. A loud, sarcastic laugh. It came from the third row, right where my son Daniel and his wife Veronica were sitting. The sound sliced through the ceremony like a knife. My heart dropped instantly. Daniel, my only son, the child I raised through tears and sleepless nights, was laughing. I tried to ignore it, pretending it wasn't real, but then I heard Veronica's voice, dripping with venom. "Oh my God, look at him," she whispered, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's not a stepfather, that's trash. Who even wears that suit in a wedding like this?" The people around them chuckled. I could see phones being raised, tiny flashes of mockery lighting up like sparks of cruelty. Veronica's mother leaned toward her, covering her mouth as she laughed too. "Poor Margaret," she said, fake sympathy in her tone. "At her age, she should be knitting, not marrying some broke old man." I felt the color drain from my face. My lips trembled, but I forced myself to keep looking forward, to focus on the minister's voice, though his words had turned into meaningless sounds. Edward stood beside me, still as a mountain. Without even looking my way, he reached over and gently squeezed my hand. His touch said, "It's okay, don't let them steal this moment," but inside I was crumbling. How could they? How could my son, the one I gave my life for, humiliate me in front of 400 guests? The minister spoke about love and unity, but I could feel the growing laughter behind me. Every few seconds, another giggle, a whisper. A snide comment. Someone said, "He looks like he came straight from a bus stop." Another voice added, "Maybe she picked him up on the street." Each word hit like a slap. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but then I looked at Edward again. He was calm, eyes fixed ahead, completely unbothered by the whispers. His quiet dignity steadied me. It made me realize I wasn't embarrassed for him. I was ashamed of them. Still, my mind raced. What would people think? Would they pity me? Would they believe their words? After all, Edward wasn't some flashy businessman or wealthy gentleman. He was just an old man who sold handmade furniture and lived simply. But he had the kind of heart no amount of money could buy. The minister finally asked us to exchange vows. Edward's voice was deep but soft, trembling slightly with emotion. "Margaret," he said, looking straight into my eyes, "I may not have much to give you, but every breath I take, every sunrise I see, I want to share it with you." "Aw," I heard a few guests sigh, touched by his sincerity. I had tears in my eyes, and then, out of nowhere, Daniel's voice echoed across the room. "This is pathetic," he said loudly. The room went dead silent. Even the minister froze. "Mom," he laughed, holding his champagne glass like a trophy, "you're seriously marrying this nobody? Look at him. He probably can't even afford the food you're serving tonight." A few gasps, a few shocked whispers. Someone dropped a fork. My body went cold. "Daniel, please," I whispered, my voice trembling. He kept going, drunk on arrogance and alcohol. "You worked your whole life, Mom. You saved every penny. And now you're throwing it all away on a broke old man?" The humiliation was unbearable. People stared at me, some out of pity, some out of curiosity. Veronica stood beside him now, crossing her arms. "He's right," she said with a smirk. "That isn't a husband, that's a charity project." I felt something break inside me. My tears stopped. My shame turned into something else, something hot and powerful fury, but I stayed silent. I looked around that hall at the guests who had come to celebrate love but were now witnessing cruelty. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised with every bit of strength I had. And I looked at Edward, who had said nothing, done nothing, except stand tall beside me. My heart whispered one thing, enough. Still, I didn't speak. Not yet, not until the right moment, because deep inside I knew something none of them did. Edward wasn't reacting, not because he was weak, but because he was waiting. And that calm in his eyes, it hid something. Something I couldn't quite understand. Later, when the truth came out, I would realize he wasn't just protecting me that day. He was teaching everyone in that hall a lesson they would never forget. But right then, as laughter filled the air again, I stood quietly, breathing slowly, forcing my tears back. Because the storm inside me was only beginning to form, and trust me, when it hit, no one in that hall would ever laugh at us again. What happened next? Let's just say my wedding turned into a war and my son had no idea he was mocking a billionaire in disguise. If you've ever felt your heart pounding so hard that even breathing hurts, that was me in that moment. I stood there in front of hundreds of guests, frozen, watching my son, my own flesh and blood, tear apart the most beautiful day of my life. Daniel's voice echoed through the grand hall, each word sharper than the last. "Do you really think this is love, Mom?" He laughed, swaying slightly with a champagne glass in hand. "You've completely lost it. You're marrying a broke, wrinkled man who probably just wants your money." There it was again, the word money, always money. That's all my son ever cared about. I could feel 400 pairs of eyes watching me, waiting to see how I'd react. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others amused. A few even started whispering like it was some kind of reality show. Veronica, my daughter-in-law, stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly, her red lips curling into a cruel smile. "He's right," she said. "It's embarrassing, Margaret, at your age, falling for someone like him." She tilted her chin toward Edward, who stood by my side, silent but calm, his hands folded neatly in front of him. The entire third row of her family began giggling again. "Ha ha ha," I could almost hear their mocking thoughts. "Look at her, the desperate old widow marrying a nobody." My stomach twisted, my hands trembled. For a second I thought I might faint. I had dreamed of this wedding for years, not for luxury, not for show, but because I believed in second chances. I thought maybe, just maybe, my son would be happy for me, but now all I could see was hate. The minister tried to continue, his voice shaky. "Love is patient, love is kind," but even he sounded unsure. The hall that was once full of warmth now felt suffocating. I could see some guests looking at me with pity, that painful, unwanted pity that says, "Poor woman, even her family doesn't respect her." Edward still hadn't said a word. He simply looked at me, calm as the ocean before a storm. That quiet strength in his eyes kept me standing, and then Daniel took another step forward. "I mean, come on," he sneered. "This guy lives in a shoebox apartment. His car is older than I am. You could have anyone, Mom, anyone. Why settle for this?" Enough. The word came out before I even realized I had spoken. My voice was low, trembling, but it carried through the hall like a bell. Everyone went silent. Daniel froze. Veronica raised her eyebrows, surprised. I turned slowly to face them. My heart was beating so fast I thought I might pass out, but something inside me, something that had been quiet for years, finally woke up. "Do you even remember who I am?" I asked softly. "Do you remember what I went through to raise you?" Daniel frowned. "Mom, please don't." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm now. "You want truth, let's speak the truth." The room was dead silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. "For 35 years I worked myself to the bone," I said. "I cleaned houses, I washed dishes, I gave up vacations, birthdays, everything so you could study, eat well, wear the best clothes. I sacrificed every dream I had just to see you happy." I could hear the faint sound of someone whispering, "Oh my God, but you," I continued, "you never saw that, did you? You were always embarrassed by me. Embarrassed that your mother worked for other people. Embarrassed that I didn't have money like your in-laws. And now you dare to humiliate me on my wedding day." Daniel's smirk was gone now. He looked uneasy, glancing around the hall. But Veronica stepped in, rolling her eyes. "Oh please, don't make this a drama. You're playing the victim again. Daniel's just being honest. He doesn't want you to be taken advantage of." I let out a bitter laugh, ha ha ha, half pain, half disbelief. "Taken advantage of? By whom? By the man who treats me with kindness, who makes me laugh every single day, who never once asked me for anything." The sound of clapping broke through the tension. My best friend Claire stood up from her table, her eyes full of tears. "You tell them, Margaret," she said loudly. That broke the spell. Some guests nodded, whispering in agreement. Others started murmuring in support. Daniel's face turned red. "You're making a fool of yourself, Mom. Just stop." "Stop," I said, my voice rising. "Stop defending the man I love. Stop standing up for myself for the first time in years." He opened his mouth again, but I didn't let him. "Do you know what's really pathetic, Daniel? It's not Edward's old car or his simple suit. It's a grown man who thinks money makes him better than others. That's pathetic." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Veronica muttered under her breath, "You'll regret this." Maybe I would. But not today, because for the first time in my life I wasn't just Daniel's mother. I was me. I turned toward Edward, tears threatening to fall, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen." He looked at me gently and said, "Don't be sorry for telling the truth." His calm tone, his quiet pride, it gave me back my strength. Then I turned to face everyone again. My voice didn't shake this time. "If anyone here believes love is about money, you can leave right now, because in this hall I will not let greed or arrogance ruin what's pure." No one moved. Not a single person. Then I looked straight at Daniel and Veronica. "You too leave," gasps. A woman dropped her glass. The sound of it shattering echoed like thunder. Daniel blinked in disbelief. "You can't be serious, Mom." "Oh, I am," I said quietly. "You've disrespected me, insulted the man I love, and humiliated us both in front of everyone. So yes, I'm serious." Get out. For a moment he just stared at me, completely stunned. He wasn't used to hearing no from me. He wasn't used to me standing tall. Veronica scoffed. You're kicking out your own son? I nodded. My son wouldn't treat me this way, so if that's who you've become, then yes, you're not welcome here. The hall was dead silent. I could feel tears stinging behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, not in front of them. Not this time. Daniel's jaw tightened. Fine, he said, his voice dripping with anger, but don't come crying to me when this old man breaks your heart. Edward finally looked up at him, eyes calm but sharp. I would never hurt her, he said simply. Something about his voice made even Daniel step back. Veronica grabbed his arm. Let's go, she hissed. And with that, the two of them stormed out of the hall, followed by her snickering family. When the doors closed behind them, I felt my knees go weak. The whole hall was silent again, and then a single clap, Claire, then another, until the whole room was filled with applause. I couldn't hold it anymore. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Edward took my hand, smiling softly. You did the right thing, he whispered. Maybe I did, but deep inside, a storm of guilt and pain was brewing because I had just kicked my own son out of my wedding. But I had no idea that the man they mocked, the man I defended, was hiding a truth that would shake my entire world. The doors closed behind them with a loud thud, and just like that, my son was gone. The hall that once buzzed with laughter and music had turned eerily quiet. All I could hear was the faint echo of my heartbeat, fast and uneven. I had just kicked my own child out of my wedding, my only son. For a moment, I couldn't even move. I just stood there, frozen, holding the same bouquet I had dreamed of carrying for months, wondering, what have I done? Edward's hand found mine. His touch was warm, steady, grounding. Breathe, Margaret, he whispered. His voice was soft but strong, like it carried a lifetime of calm. I tried, but my chest felt tight. Tears blurred my vision. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the bouquet. People were staring, some in shock, others with compassion. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, yet in that moment, it felt like it was only me and Edward standing in a silent storm. Then someone began to clap again. Claire, my dearest friend. Then another person joined, then another. Before I knew it, the hall filled with gentle applause, not the kind that celebrates, but the kind that says, we're proud of you. I wiped my tears, smiled weakly, and nodded to the guests. The minister cleared his throat awkwardly. Shall we continue? He asked carefully, his kind old eyes searching mine. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to go on with the ceremony and pretend none of this had happened, but the truth was, everything inside me was trembling. Edward looked at me and said softly, we don't have to rush, love. We can pause for a moment. Pause. That word was all I needed. We stepped aside for a minute while the guests stayed seated. I could hear people murmuring, whispering to each other, but for once I didn't care. I was too lost in the whirlwind of emotions. Edward leaned closer and said, you were brave back there. I shook my head, still crying. No, I was cruel. He's my son, Edward. I humiliated him in front of everyone. Edward's gentle smile didn't fade. No, my love, you didn't humiliate him. He humiliated himself. You just stopped letting it continue. I sighed, rubbing my temple. You don't understand. I raised him alone. After my husband died, he was all I had. Every single decision I made was for him. And now I feel like I've lost him forever. Edward took a deep breath, looking at me with eyes that carried both sadness and pride. Sometimes we need to lose what's breaking us to find what's meant for us. His words lingered in the air like a whisper from fate itself. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the guilt wouldn't stop eating at me then. A loud voice cut through the whispers. So this is what it's come to. It was Veronica's father standing near the back of the hall. His large frame and arrogant tone made the air feel heavier. Throwing family out like trash, you'll regret this, lady. I turned to him, wiping my tears. Sir, with all due respect, your family turned my wedding into a circus. If you think money gives you the right to insult people, then you're the one who should be ashamed. He huffed and muttered something under his breath, but before he could speak again, Edward finally moved forward, and for the first time that day, my quiet, calm husband raised his voice. Enough, he said, his tone firm but composed. The entire hall went silent again. You've already disrespected my wife enough. Leave if you can't show basic decency. The authority in his voice stunned everyone. It wasn't loud, but it was commanding, like the kind of tone only men used to being obeyed had. It sent chills down my spine. Veronica's father froze, then scoffed, muttered something about crazy people, and stormed out with his family. One by one, the rest of them followed, muttering, glaring, but leaving, and as that door shut for the last time, a strange peace settled over the hall. I turned to Edward, whispering, "Who are you?" He chuckled softly, brushing a tear from my cheek. "Just a man who loves you more than his pride." I wanted to believe that was all, but the way he said it, the calm in his voice, there was something about him that didn't fit the image of a simple man. His eyes had seen too much, his tone carried too much certainty. But I didn't ask then. My heart was too tired for mysteries. The ceremony resumed. My makeup was ruined, my voice was shaky, but the vows still happened. When Edward slid the ring onto my finger, I almost laughed from relief. The The crowd cheered, Claire whistled loudly, and the hall filled with warmth again. For a few hours, everything seemed okay. People danced, music played, champagne flowed. The toxic laughter was gone, but deep inside, something was stirring, an odd mix of curiosity and unease. Edward was smiling, yes, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes, almost as if he knew something no one else did. Later that night, as the party wound down, I sat alone near the edge of the dance floor. My feet ached, my mascara had long smudged, but all I could think about was Daniel. Where was he? Was he angry? Was he crying? The thought made my chest ache. Edward approached and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You shouldn't be sitting here alone, I smiled faintly. I was just thinking about Daniel. He nodded. I know. Do you think I did the right thing? I asked. I mean, maybe I should have just ignored him. Maybe. Edward stopped me gently. Margaret, he said quietly, if you keep excusing people who hurt you, you'll spend your whole life apologizing for their mistakes. His words hit me hard. For a man who claimed to live simply, he spoke with the kind of wisdom that came from power or pain. Then he said something that made my heart skip a beat. Worry about your son tonight. Tomorrow you'll understand everything. I frowned, confused. What do you mean? He just smiled and looked at the band, signaling them to start the next song. Dance with me, Mrs. Evans, he said, so I did. We danced slowly under the dim lights, surrounded by the few friends who had stayed till the end. His hand rested gently on my back, his heartbeat steady against mine. For the first time that day, I felt safe again, but deep down, a strange feeling began to rise, a mix of fear, love, and curiosity, because the way Edward looked at me in that moment, it was as if he knew something I didn't. Something big, something that would change everything. When he finally told me the truth the next morning, I realized my son hadn't just mocked a poor old man, he had mocked a billionaire in disguise. The morning after my wedding felt unreal. The sunlight sneaked through the white curtains, painting the room golden. I woke up in a hotel suite I barely remembered walking into the night before. My eyes were swollen from crying, my heart still sore from everything that had happened. But when I turned my head and saw Edward sitting by the window, quietly sipping his coffee, something inside me softened. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. Like a man who had seen chaos and decided to make peace with it, I sat up slowly, still wearing my wedding dress. You're awake early, I said, my voice groggy. He smiled without looking away from the window. I never really slept. Me neither, I whispered. I wanted to ask him what he meant by his words last night. Tomorrow you'll understand everything. But before I could, there was a soft knock at the door. A man in a navy blue suit entered, bowing slightly. Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Everything is ready downstairs. Mr. Sterling, I blinked, confused. Wait, what did he just call you? Edward chuckled softly and looked at me. You might want to get dressed, love. We have somewhere to go. What's happening? I asked, my chest tightening. He stood, buttoning his blazer with calm grace. You'll see soon. We left the hotel in silence. Outside, a black car waited, not the old, squeaky one he usually drove. This one was sleek, spotless, and clearly expensive. A driver opened the door for us. I frowned, completely thrown off. Edward, I said slowly, whose car is this? He looked at me, eyes twinkling. Ours. Ours, I laughed nervously. Edward, what are you talking about? You live in that small apartment near Maple Street. He nodded. I do, or at least I did, but there's more to me than what you've seen. My stomach twisted. Edward, please, you're scaring me a little. He reached out, taking my hand gently. You'll understand soon, Margaret, I promise. The ride was silent, except for the low hum of the engine. My mind was spinning in circles. Who is Mr. Sterling? Why the fancy car? Why the driver? Every minute that passed, my curiosity grew heavier until I could barely breathe. After about 20 minutes, we pulled into a long private driveway. At the end of it stood a massive glass building, sleek, modern, with the name Sterling Holdings gleaming across the top in silver letters. I stared out the window, my jaw dropping. Sterling Holdings. Wait, isn't this that huge construction and investment company, the one that builds entire cities? Edward smiled, his calm never wavering. Yes. I turned to him, my heart pounding. Edward, what are we doing here? He looked at me for a long moment before answering. Because it's mine. What? He smiled almost shyly. This company, it's mine, Margaret. I built it. I froze. My brain refused to process his words. You're joking, right? You live in a tiny apartment. You fix old furniture. He shook his head gently. That's what everyone thinks. That's what I wanted everyone to think. I blinked rapidly, trying to understand. You're telling me you own Sterling Holdings, the company worth billions? Yes, I laughed weakly. Edward, that's impossible. He walked toward me, eyes soft. It's true. My full name is Edward Sterling. For the past 8 years, I've lived a simple life. No one knew who I really was, not even you. I didn't hide it to deceive you, Margaret. I hid it because I wanted to find love that was real. I felt dizzy. My knees almost gave out and I gripped the edge of a chair to steady myself. A billionaire, I whispered. You're a billionaire, he smiled gently. Something like that. I stopped counting years ago. The words hit me like thunder. All the pieces started fitting together: his calm during the insults, his confidence, the way people respected him even without knowing why. I whispered, "Oh my God, my son called you trash." Edward sighed. "Yes. And that's exactly why I never told anyone, because when people think you're poor, they show you who they really are." I sat down slowly, covering my face with both hands. Tears started to fall. "This can't be real, this can't be real." He knelt beside me, his voice soft and steady. "Margaret, when my first wife died, I was surrounded by people who only wanted my money. Friends, business partners, even family. They all turned on me, so I left it all behind for a while. I wanted to live simply, meet people who saw me, not my bank account." I lowered my hands and met his eyes. "And then you met me," he smiled. "Yes. You didn't care about money, you cared about me. You offered me tea in your tiny kitchen, you shared stories about your life, you treated me like a person, not a wallet. That's when I knew you were the woman I wanted to marry." I started laughing through my tears. "Oh God, and my son called you a beggar." Edward chuckled too, shaking his head. "I've been called worse." We both laughed, but beneath the laughter my heart ached, because while I was finally learning the truth, I also knew what it meant. My son's cruelty had just become the biggest mistake of his life. "Edward," I whispered, "why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I needed to be sure," he said. "I needed to know that you'd stand by me even when the world mocked me. And you did." I sighed, wiping my face. "I didn't stand by you because I knew you were rich. I did it because you were kind. Because you made me feel seen." He took my hands in his and kissed them gently. "And that's exactly why you're my wife." For a moment, I forgot everything else: the humiliation, the whispers, the pain. All that existed was the truth between us. Then his assistant entered again, holding a newspaper. "Sir, the press already has the story." Edward raised an eyebrow and took the paper. He turned it toward me with a small grin. The front page headline read, "Billionaire marries widow they called trash." I gasped, covering my mouth. "Oh my God, that's us." Edward chuckled, folding the paper neatly. "Yes. It seems your son's insults made quite the story." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I did both. "He's going to lose his mind when he sees this." Edward's voice turned calm again, almost serious. "And he will. Because now, Margaret, he'll realize something he never understood before: wealth doesn't buy class, it only exposes character." I looked at him, heart pounding, tears glistening. "So what happens now?" He smiled. "Now, my love, the real story begins." I thought the drama was over, but I was wrong, because once my son discovered who Edward really was, that's when everything truly exploded. For the rest of that morning, my world spun like a carousel I couldn't get off. Billionaire. The word kept ringing in my head, louder every time. I kept staring at Edward, "No, Mr. Sterling," and wondering how on earth I'd missed all the signs. How could the man who lived so simply, who fixed his own leaky tap, who still used an old flip phone, secretly run one of the biggest companies in the country? We sat in his office on the top floor of that glass tower. The view stretched across the whole city: shimmering buildings, busy roads, and the same skyline I'd admired my whole life from far below. Now I was seeing it from above. "This can't be real," I whispered. Edward smiled. "It's as real as the love you showed me." He walked toward the huge window and looked down. "I built all this, Margaret, but I built it at a cost. I lost my peace, my first marriage, and my faith in people. So one day I walked away from it all." I was speechless. He turned back to me and continued softly, "After my wife, Letitia, died, everything around me became fake. Friends, colleagues, everyone looked at me like I was a walking bank account. I tried to start over, but every woman I met was interested only in my wealth, not in me." I swallowed hard. My heart hurt just hearing the sadness in his voice. "So you pretended to be poor?" He chuckled gently. "Not pretended exactly, I just stopped showing what I had. I sold my mansion, moved into a small apartment, and started doing something I loved: hand-making furniture. It gave me peace. That's when I met you at that small market. Do you remember?" I smiled faintly through my tears. "How could I forget? You were trying to lift that heavy table alone, and I scolded you for not asking for help." He laughed softly. And I remember thinking, finally, someone who talks to me like a human being. For a few moments, we just smiled at each other. The air between us felt different now, heavier but warm still. 100 thoughts ran through my mind. "Edward, if you're so rich, why let everyone believe otherwise? Why not tell me from the start?" His gaze softened. "Because I didn't want to test you, Margaret. I wanted to test the world through you. I wanted to see if love could still exist without money, and you proved it can." I let out a shaky laugh. "So when my son called you poor, you weren't even angry?" He smiled gently. "I was disappointed, not angry, because I knew exactly what that said about him." Hearing that made my heart sink again. My son. My poor, foolish son who thought wealth was everything. What would happen when he found out the truth? Edward seemed to sense my thoughts. "Don't worry about Daniel for now," he said. "Life has a way of humbling those who think they're untouchable." I nodded slowly. The truth had finally come out, and strangely I didn't feel betrayed. I felt proud. proud that the man I married wasn't just kind, but also wise. As we walked through the building, employees greeted him with respect and warmth, not the fake, fearful kind, but genuine admiration. It struck me how different he was from the image of cold, arrogant billionaires you see in movies. He knew every janitor's name, every worker's story. He stopped twice just to ask about someone's sick mother. That's when I realized this man's wealth wasn't measured in money. It was measured in decency. When we got back to his office, he turned on a large screen showing news coverage of our wedding. Reporters stood outside the hotel, describing the dramatic revelation of a secret billionaire groom. I buried my face in my hands. "Oh no," I groaned, "now the whole world knows." Edward laughed softly. "Let them." For once a headline is true. Despite the chaos, he made me feel calm. His humor, his poise, it was grounding. Then he walked over to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small red box. "This," he said, handing it to me, "is something I was saving for after the ceremony." Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with tiny diamond hearts, simple, elegant, and glowing. "It's beautiful," I whispered, tearing up again. "I had it made for Letitia," he said quietly, "but she passed before I could give it to her. So I kept it locked away until I found someone worthy of wearing it." I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears poured down my cheeks. "Edward, I don't deserve all this." He wiped a tear from my face, smiling. "Yes, you do. Because you stood up for me when the world laughed at me, and you did it without knowing who I was. That's what makes you rare, Margaret." For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I did both. "Ha ha ha, oh, Edward," I whispered. "I can't believe my son called you a hobo in front of a billionaire." He chuckled. "Life has a sense of humor, doesn't it?" We both laughed until our eyes watered again. He leaned back and said quietly, "You know, people spend their whole lives chasing money. But the real treasure is finding someone who loves you when you have nothing to give." That line hit me deep. "If this story has your heart racing already," I said softly, turning to the camera in my mind, "make sure you subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes the people we underestimate hide the most beautiful truths." I looked back at Edward, smiling through my tears. "You could have had anyone, Edward, any rich woman, any glamorous lady from your world." "Why me?" he answered without hesitation. "Because when I met you, you didn't see a billionaire. You saw a lonely man who just wanted a friend, and that, my love, is priceless." I covered my mouth, weeping quietly. He reached across the table, taking my hands again. "Our story isn't about wealth or status, it's about dignity. You defended love when no one else did, and that's why this," he gestured around the office, "belongs to you as much as it does to me." I shook my head, still overwhelmed. "Edward, I don't need any of this, I just want you." He smiled. "Good, because the rest will follow." As I sat there, looking at him, I realized how completely my life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, I was a widow everyone pitied. Today, I was the wife of a man everyone envied. But deep down, the biggest change wasn't the money, it was me. For the first time, I wasn't ashamed of being seen. I had found someone who saw me, not for what I lacked, but for who I was. I squeezed Edward's hand and whispered, "You know, my son won't take this well." He chuckled softly. "No, he won't. But maybe that's exactly what he needs." I looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" He stood, adjusting his watch. "Sometimes life has to teach people the hard way. And I think Daniel's lesson is about to begin." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you planning to do?" Edward's eyes twinkled, calm but unreadable. "Nothing cruel," he said, "just the truth. Because when truth reveals itself, it humbles even the proudest souls." And in that instant, I knew something was coming. Something that would shake not just Daniel, but everything he thought he knew about life, love, and respect. The news of Edward's true identity spread fast. But when my son found out who he had mocked in front of 400 people, his reaction nearly destroyed everything. By the next morning, my life had changed forever again. The story was everywhere. Newspapers, social media, even morning talk shows were buzzing with headlines like "The billionaire who married the widow they called trash," and "Humiliation turns into fairy tale." Everywhere I looked, there was my face, my ruined makeup, my tear-stained dress, frozen mid-shock. I wasn't ready for fame, especially not this kind. When I stepped out of the hotel with Edward, cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters were shouting, "Mrs. Sterling, did you know he was a billionaire before the wedding? And how does it feel to go from cleaning homes to owning half the city?" I just stood there, clutching Edward's arm. My heart raced, my hands shook. I had never been so overwhelmed in my entire life, but Edward, he looked completely calm. He nodded politely at the reporters and guided me gently into the car. "Ignore them, love," he said. "They'll get bored in a few days." I laughed nervously. "Easy for you to say, you're used to all this." He smiled, brushing his thumb over my knuckles. "Maybe, but the only opinion that matters to me is yours." That simple sentence made my chest tighten with warmth. Even surrounded by chaos, he had this rare ability to make me feel safe. The car drove us to a quiet, private airfield. My jaw dropped when I saw a helicopter waiting for us. "Edward," I gasped. "Please tell me that's not for us." He grinned. "Then I won't tell you." "Ha ha ha, Edward, I've never even been inside one." Then today's a first, he said, helping me in as the blades spun above us. The city grew smaller beneath our feet. I could see everything, the river, the parks, even the little church where I used to pray for better days. For a moment I just stared out the window, speechless. Edward leaned toward me. See that hotel over there? I nodded. It's ours. And that shopping plaza on the corner, that too. I turned to him slowly. You're joking, he laughed, not even close. We flew over half the city as he pointed out building after building, all his creations. Every time he said, that one's mine, my heart beat faster, not because of the money but because of what it meant. This man, whom everyone had mocked for being poor, had built a kingdom brick by brick, and yet he had chosen to live simply. When we landed, a group of his employees greeted us with smiles and respectful bows. Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling. Hearing Mrs. Sterling still made my heart flutter. Edward took me by the hand and led me into a towering glass building, the headquarters of Sterling Foundation. Inside, everything was modern yet warm. There were photos of schools, hospitals, and families on the walls. He stopped in front of a large mural that read, "We rise by lifting others." I looked at him, confused. You built this foundation too, he nodded. After Letitia passed, I wanted her memory to mean something, so I started helping women who'd been abandoned or left with nothing, widows, single mothers, women like you once were. We provide housing, jobs, and education. I gasped. Edward, this is beautiful, he smiled softly. It's just my way of giving back. You know, money by itself means nothing. But when you use it to bring someone hope, that's when it becomes powerful. I felt tears pricking my eyes again. I wish Daniel could hear you say that. Edward's expression shifted, calm but thoughtful. He will one day. Everyone faces a moment where their values are tested. For him, it's coming soon. I sighed, looking down. He must have seen the headlines by now. Oh, I'm sure he has, Edward said, his voice steady. And I'm sure his ego is already burning. I chuckled bitterly. He'll probably think I married you because you're rich. Edward squeezed my hand gently. People who measure everything in money always assume others do the same. That line stuck in my head all day. Later, we went to his private office upstairs. A woman with kind eyes, his assistant, Marjorie, handed me a folder. Mr. Sterling asked me to prepare these for you, ma'am. I opened it, and my jaw dropped. It contained ownership papers, properties, investments, even a trust fund in my name. Edward, I gasped. What is this? He smiled. It's your security. You never have to worry about anything again, Margaret. You've earned your peace. I started to protest, but he placed a finger on my lips. Before you say no, this isn't charity, it's gratitude, for loving me when the world saw nothing in me. I couldn't help it. I burst into tears again. He chuckled softly, pulling me close. If you cry this much every time I surprise you, we're going to need a lifetime supply of tissues. Ha ha ha, you might be right, I said, laughing through my tears. We spent the rest of the day touring his projects, schools, hospitals, housing sites. Every person we met greeted him like an old friend. He wasn't just a billionaire, he was good. The kind of good that didn't need to be announced. By the evening, we returned home, well, his home, though he insisted it was ours now. It wasn't a flashy palace. It was a beautiful villa by the lake, elegant, peaceful, full of warmth. As we walked through the garden, the sunset reflected off the water, painting everything gold. I turned to him and said, you know, this feels unreal. I used to dream of a small apartment with a balcony, and now, look at this. Edward smiled. Dreams have funny ways of growing when you let love lead them. I chuckled softly. You and your quotes. Maybe I'll publish a book one day, How to Be a Secret Billionaire, he teased. Ha ha ha, please don't. The last thing I need is more attention. He laughed too, but then his expression softened. Speaking of attention, I need to tell you something. I frowned. What? He hesitated, then sighed. Daniel has already tried calling me 3 times. My assistant told me he left messages. My heart sank. Oh no. What did he say? Edward looked at me quietly. I didn't listen. I thought you should be the one to decide. I bit my lip, torn between love and anger. He must be furious and embarrassed. He's both, Edward said calmly. But I have a feeling he's not calling to apologize. I nodded slowly, my heart heavy. He's calling because he knows now who you really are. Edward took my hand, his voice gentle but firm. Whatever he says next, whatever he does, don't let guilt make your decisions. Sometimes love means standing firm, not giving in. I took a deep breath, feeling that strange mix of sadness and strength again. If you've ever had to choose between love and guilt, you know how hard it is, I whispered. And if you're feeling this story deep down, subscribe for more, because sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that heal us the most. As the night grew quiet, I looked at the sky, at the stars that shimmered above the lake. I thought about my son, probably sitting somewhere angry, confused, maybe even jealous. I prayed silently that one day he'd understand what real wealth looked like. But I was wrong. The next day, Daniel called, and his voice wasn't filled with love or regret. It was filled with desperation and greed. The call came the next morning. I was sitting in the sunroom, wrapped in a soft blanket, sipping coffee by the window overlooking the lake. The air was calm, the birds were singing, and for the first time in years, my life felt peaceful. Until my phone buzzed, the screen flashed a name that made my heart tighten. Daniel. For a moment, I froze. My hand hovered above the phone. Should I answer? Part of me wanted to hear his voice. The other part still remembered the humiliation, the laughter, the pain. Edward glanced up from his newspaper. You don't have to pick it up if you're not ready. I took a deep breath and pressed accept. Hello. There was silence for a few seconds, then a shaky voice said, Mom. I swallowed hard. Yes, Daniel, he sighed loudly. Mom, I saw the news. Of course he had. The entire country had. I didn't mean to, he began, but I cut him off gently. Didn't mean to what, Daniel? To humiliate me in front of 400 people, or to call the man I love trash? He paused. I could hear him breathing on the other end, then in a smaller voice he said, I messed up, okay? I didn't know he was him. My heart sank. You didn't know he was a billionaire, you mean? He hesitated. Well, yeah. I mean, you never told me. You should have said something. I sighed. Daniel, do you realize what you're saying? You're apologizing because he's rich, not because you were cruel. He went quiet again. Then after a few seconds his tone shifted, smoother, calculated. Mom, listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can fix this. I was thinking, maybe you and Mr. Sterling could come over for dinner. We could talk, start fresh. I didn't even need to look at Edward. I knew that voice, the fake sweetness, the sudden warmth. My son wanted something. Dinner, I repeated slowly. After everything, he chuckled nervously. Mom, come on. I overreacted. Look, things have been hard for me lately. My business is not doing great. Veronica's stressed. We could really use some help getting back on our feet. Ah, there it was, the real reason. I closed my eyes. Daniel, I see, so you want help, not forgiveness, he sighed. Mom, please don't make this harder. You're married to a billionaire now. It's not like it'll cost him anything. My chest tightened, anger, sadness, disbelief, all swirling together. Edward gently placed his hand on my shoulder. He could hear every word, but he didn't interrupt. I spoke softly but firmly. Daniel, money doesn't fix character. It doesn't erase disrespect. Mom, he snapped. I said I was sorry. Why are you being so difficult? I felt a lump in my throat. Because you're not sorry, Daniel. You're desperate, and there's a big difference. There was a long silence. Then he muttered, I can't believe this. You choose him over your own son? Those words hit hard, the kind of words meant to wound. My eyes filled with tears. Daniel, I chose myself for once, that's all. He scoffed, his tone now sharp. Fine. Enjoy your billionaire life, Mom. Don't come running when he gets tired of you. And with that, he hung up. I just sat there, staring at the phone, feeling my chest ache like someone had pulled the air out of me. Edward set his newspaper down quietly. May I say something? I nodded weakly. He's drowning, Edward said calmly, and like most drowning men, he's grabbing at anything, even if it's the very person who tried to save him. I sighed. I know, but it hurts. I thought maybe, after everything, he'd at least sound remorseful. Edward leaned back, his expression thoughtful. People rarely see their mistakes until life mirrors them back. Right now, Daniel still thinks love can be bought. Let him learn what happens when it can't. I wanted to believe that, but the mother in me still ached. He's my son, Edward. I can't just watch him struggle. He smiled faintly. You can help him, but not by giving him money. Help him by letting him face what he's created. Sometimes pain is the only teacher strong enough to make us listen. His calm made sense, but it didn't make it easier. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Daniel's words, you choose him over your own son. They echoed like a curse. I got out of bed and stood by the window, staring at the moon's reflection on the lake. Edward walked up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. You're thinking about him again? I sighed. Always. I don't know how to stop caring, Edward. He kissed my forehead. You don't have to stop caring, you just have to stop hurting yourself in the name of caring. Those words sank deep into my soul. I closed my eyes, tears rolling silently down my face. He held me until my breathing steadied. Then he whispered, you've carried him for too long. It's time to let life carry him now. I nodded slowly. I wanted to be strong for myself, for Edward, maybe even for Daniel someday. If you've ever loved someone who hurt you, you'll understand this feeling, I whispered to myself. Sometimes love means stepping back, even when your heart begs you not to. And if this story touches something inside you, subscribe for more stories that remind us that real strength often hides in silence. The next few days were strangely quiet. The calls stopped, the news slowly moved on to the next story. Edward and I began settling into a calm rhythm, dinners by the lake, long walks, quiet evenings full of laughter and soft music. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't over, because every mother's heart feels the storm before it comes, and sure enough, 1 week later it came, a letter. Folded messy and hand-delivered to our gate. The handwriting was shaky, but I'd recognize it anywhere. Daniel's. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It read, Mom, I need your help. I didn't know who else to turn to. Please come. I'm sorry. My heart stopped. I looked up at Edward, eyes wide. He's in trouble. Edward sighed quietly, taking the letter from my hand and reading it. Then he looked at me, calm as ever. Then maybe it's time for him to finally face the truth with you by his side. I nodded slowly, tears forming again. I just hope he's ready to hear it. The next morning I went to see my son. What I found broke my heart and changed everything I thought I knew about forgiveness. The morning air felt heavier than usual. I don't know if it was the weight in my chest or the quiet that surrounded me, but every step I took toward Daniel's apartment felt like walking through fog. I hadn't seen him since the wedding. The thought of facing him again made my stomach twist, yet my heart whispered, "He's still your son." Edward offered to come with me, but I told him no. "This is something I have to do alone," I said, and he understood. That's one of the things I loved about him. He never forced, never pushed, only supported. When I reached Daniel's building, I almost didn't recognize it. Paint peeling off the walls, cracked glass near the entrance. This wasn't the fancy apartment complex I remembered. My son used to live in luxury. Now it looked like life had stripped away everything he once bragged about. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Finally, the door creaked open, and there he was. My son, tired, pale, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. The confident man who once mocked me was now a shadow of himself. "Mom," he whispered, his voice low and hoarse. My heart broke in an instant. "Daniel, what happened to you?" He stepped aside quietly. "Come in." The room smelled faintly of cigarettes and old takeout. Papers were scattered across the floor, bills, overdue notices, debt letters. Veronica wasn't there. For a moment I wondered if she had left him. He sat on the edge of the couch, running a hand through his messy hair. I didn't know where else to go. I sat across from him, clutching my purse tightly. "Your letter said you needed help." "Tell me what's going on." He hesitated, avoiding my eyes. "I made a few bad decisions," he said finally. "The business went under. Veronica's family pulled out their money. Now we're in debt. The bank froze my account. We might lose the apartment next week." I sighed deeply, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Oh, Daniel," he looked up suddenly, eyes desperate. "Mom, I know I messed up, but I'm begging you, please talk to Edward. Maybe he can help me, just a loan. I'll pay him back, I swear." There it was, the same tone, the same pattern, the same son who thought money was the solution to everything. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you remember what you said to me at the wedding?" He looked down, ashamed. "Mom, please don't bring that up." "I have to," I said gently, "because you didn't just insult my husband that day. You insulted love, humility, and respect, and until you understand that, no amount of money will save you." He clenched his fists. "So you're not going to help me?" Tears filled my eyes. "I am helping you, just not in the way you want." He stood up abruptly, his voice rising. "You'd rather watch your son lose everything. You think that man of yours is more important than your own blood?" I flinched. "Don't say that. It's true," he shouted. "Ever since you married him, you've forgotten who you are." That was the moment something inside me snapped. My tears dried, my voice steadied. "No, Daniel," I said firmly. "For the first time I remembered who I am. I'm not your personal wallet. I'm not your emotional punching bag. I'm your mother, and you've treated me like a stranger for years." He fell silent, staring at me with shock. I took a deep breath. "Do you know what broke me the most at that wedding? It wasn't your words. It was realizing that I raised a man who thought kindness was weakness." He turned away, his shoulders trembling. "I was angry," he muttered. "I didn't mean half the things I said." "I know," I said quietly. "But anger reveals truth, Daniel, and the truth is you cared more about status than love." He sat down again, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know how to fix it, Mom. Everything's gone. Veronica left 2 weeks ago. She said she can't live with a failure." I felt my heart twist. For all his arrogance, he was still my boy, broken, humiliated, and alone. I walked over and sat beside him. "Daniel, listen to me. You can rebuild your life. But this time, do it right. Stop chasing what doesn't matter. Learn to respect people, not for what they have, but for who they are." He looked at me, tears forming. "Do you really think I can?" I smiled faintly. "I know you can. But you have to start with an apology." He frowned. "To Edward, to yourself," I said softly, "and then to him." He nodded slowly, his face wet with tears. For the first time in years, he didn't look proud or defensive, just human. Before leaving, I placed a folded paper on the table. "This is Edward's lawyer's contact. If you're serious about fixing your debts, he'll help you set up a plan, but I won't ask Edward to bail you out." He didn't argue. He just stared at the paper quietly, as if realizing that the real help I was offering wasn't money. It was a chance to start again. At the door, I turned back one last time. "Daniel, you may have lost everything, but maybe that's the best thing that could have happened to you." He looked up, confused. "How can losing everything be good?" "Because," I said gently, "when you have nothing left, you finally see what truly matters." I stepped out before he could answer, my eyes burning with tears outside. The air felt lighter, but my heart heavier. I had done what I needed to do, not as a billionaire's wife, but as a mother who had finally learned the difference between helping and enabling. When I got home, Edward was waiting by the door. One look at me, and he knew everything. He didn't ask questions, just opened his arms, and I collapsed into them, crying quietly. He stroked my hair gently. "You did the right thing," he whispered. I nodded against his chest. "I just hope he finds his way, Edward." "I can't lose him completely." Edward smiled softly. Sometimes you have to lose someone a little so they can find themselves again. Those words echoed in my mind all night. Weeks passed with no word from Daniel. But when I finally heard from him again, it wasn't a plea for money. It was something I never expected, a letter that changed everything. Weeks went by without a word from Daniel. Every morning I checked my phone hoping to see his name. Nothing. Every evening I stared at the lake, wondering where he was sleeping, what he was eating, and whether he'd finally understood what I meant that day. The silence hurt, but maybe it was the silence he needed to finally hear himself. Edward never asked for updates, but he could see the worry written on my face. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he placed a cup of tea beside me and said, "He'll come back when he's ready." "You planted the seed, Margaret, now let time do its work." I smiled faintly. "Do you really think people can change, Edward?" He looked at the horizon for a long moment before answering. "Not all do. But the ones who lose everything and still choose to stand again, they're the ones who truly change." His words stayed with me. Then, one quiet Sunday morning, as I was trimming the roses in the garden, our housekeeper rushed out holding an envelope. "Ma'am, this just arrived for you, no sender, but it looks personal." My heart skipped. I wiped my hands and took the letter. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. My throat tightened. "Daniel," I sat down on the garden bench, sunlight falling over the paper, and began to read. "Mom, I don't know how to start this without sounding like the same selfish man you saw at that wedding. But I've had a lot of time to think. About you, about Edward, about myself. When you walked out of my apartment that day, I wanted to blame you again. I was angry. I thought you'd abandon me. But then I realized something. You didn't abandon me. I abandoned everything you taught me. You told me that respect is worth more than money. I laughed at you. You told me love matters more than pride. I ignored you, and when I lost everything, I finally understood what you meant. For the past few weeks, I've been volunteering at a youth center. They help people like me, people who messed up their lives chasing the wrong things. I've been speaking to young men who think money defines them. And every time I speak, I hear your voice in my head. I'm not writing this to ask for help, Mom. I'm writing to say thank you. You saved me by walking away." By the time I reached that line, my hands were trembling. My tears blurred the rest of the words, but I wiped them quickly and kept reading. "Edward once said real strength comes from silence. I used to think silence meant weakness. Now I understand it's where truth grows. I've started looking for work again. Small things, nothing fancy. I want to earn my life back, one honest day at a time. Tell Edward I'm sorry. I'll come see you both when I'm ready. Not as your disappointed son, but as a man you can be proud of. Love, Daniel." My chest felt tight. My hands shook as I held the letter close. I couldn't stop crying, not from sadness this time, but from a deep, aching relief. I read it again and again, letting every word sink into my heart. "Edward," I called out, voice breaking. He came running from inside, worried. "What's wrong?" I smiled through my tears and handed him the letter. "Read it." He sat beside me, reading quietly. I watched his face, the way his eyes softened, the faint smile tugging at his lips. When he finished, he exhaled deeply. "He's changing, Margaret. Slowly, but he's changing." I nodded, wiping my face. "I can't believe it. My son, he finally gets it." Edward wrapped an arm around my shoulder. "You gave him something no money could, the chance to grow. You didn't fix his pain for him, you let him feel it. That's how people rebuild." We sat there for a while, watching the wind ripple across the lake. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not the kind that comes from comfort, but the kind that comes from healing. A week later, I saw something on the news that made my heart swell with pride. The local TV station was covering a small charity event at the youth center Daniel had mentioned. The reporter said, "Today, a former businessman who lost everything shared his story with others learning to rebuild." Then the camera panned to him, Daniel standing behind a podium, nervous but smiling. He spoke with humility, with honesty. He said, "Money blinded me. I thought success meant power. But I learned the hard way that real success means peace. And peace comes when you stop running from who you are." I sat there, clutching the remote, tears streaming down my face again. Edward walked in, heard the TV, and stopped beside me. "He's doing it," I whispered. "He's really doing it." Edward smiled proudly. "That's your boy." We watched as Daniel ended his speech with something that made me sob quietly. He said, "My mother once told me when you have nothing left, you finally see what truly matters." Mom, if you're watching, thank you. I covered my mouth, whispering, "Oh, Daniel." Edward wrapped his arm around me. "You see, redemption doesn't need miracles, just courage and humility." That night, I sat by my window, holding Daniel's letter one more time. The moonlight fell across the paper, glowing softly. I whispered into the quiet, "You're forgiven, my son, and I'm proud of you." Sometimes, forgiveness isn't about words, it's about time, distance, and change, I whispered to myself. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more real stories that remind you that no one is too lost to be found again. Days turned into weeks, and life found a new rhythm. Edward's foundation grew, and we spent more time helping others rebuild, widows, single parents, lost souls. Maybe that's why Daniel's story hit me so deeply. Because I saw a little of him in every person we helped. One evening, as Edward and I sat in the garden, my phone buzzed again. A photo message. It was Daniel smiling, standing in front of the youth center, surrounded by kids. He'd written just one line below the picture: "Starting over feels good, Mom." I couldn't stop smiling. My heart, once heavy with regret, now felt light again. Months later, when Edward and I renewed our vows, Daniel walked through those doors not as the man who mocked my wedding, but as the son who finally understood love. 1 year later, life looked nothing like the chaos it once was. The storms had passed, the noise had faded, and peace had quietly made its home in my heart. Edward and I were sitting on the porch one breezy afternoon when he said something that caught me off guard. "Let's get married again." I blinked. "Edward, we already are," I laughed softly. He smiled, eyes twinkling. "Yes, but this time without the whispers, without the judgment, just us and the people who matter." My heart melted instantly. "You mean a vow renewal?" He nodded. "Exactly, a celebration of everything we've survived." I didn't need to think twice. "Then let's do it." We planned a small ceremony by the lake behind our home, the same lake that had seen my tears, my fears, and finally my healing. This time there would be no grand decorations, no expensive venue. Just white lilies, fairy lights, and the soft sound of the water. The day of the ceremony arrived with sunshine and calm winds. I wore a simple pastel gown, and Edward looked as charming as ever in a navy blue suit. He didn't need designer clothes. His confidence was his elegance. Friends, a few neighbors, and some of Edward's foundation members came. The air was filled with laughter and music, nothing like the first wedding's tension. But one face was missing: Daniel. Even though we'd exchanged letters over the past months, he hadn't visited. I told myself it was okay, that he needed time. Still, a part of me hoped he'd walk through those doors. As the guests settled and the officiant began speaking, I felt that familiar lump in my throat. But this time it wasn't sadness. It was gratitude. I looked at Edward standing tall and calm and thought, "We made it." The officiant smiled and said, "Sometimes life gives us second chances, not just to love again, but to love better." Edward took my hand, his touch warm and steady. "Margaret," he began, his voice deep but soft, "when I met you, I thought my story was over. You showed me it was just beginning. You've given me peace, laughter, and faith again. I promise to love you quietly when life is loud and fiercely when it's silent." Tears blurred my vision. "Edward," I whispered, "you found me when I was invisible. You taught me that love isn't about grand gestures but about small moments, the morning coffee, the late-night laughter, the way you hold my hand like it's the only thing that matters. I promise I'll never stop being grateful for you." Everyone clapped gently, wiping tears. It was perfect, simple, sincere, sacred, and then I heard footsteps. Slow, hesitant, but familiar. My heart stopped. I turned around, and there he was. Daniel. He stood at the edge of the aisle, holding a small bouquet of lilies, his eyes red but smiling. My breath caught. "Mom," he said softly, his voice trembling. I didn't want to interrupt. I couldn't miss this one. I covered my mouth, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Daniel," he walked forward slowly, every step heavy with emotion. The guests turned to look, whispering, but I couldn't hear a thing. All I saw was my son coming back home. He stopped in front of Edward first. "Mr. Sterling," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I disrespected you, mocked you, and judged you without knowing anything about you. And yet, you treated my mother with more kindness than I ever did." "I'm sorry." Edward smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Apology accepted, son." Daniel nodded, then turned to me. "Mom, I don't know how to make up for what I did. I said terrible things. I was blind. But every day I've spent rebuilding my life, I realized one thing: I never lost you. You were always there, waiting, believing." I stepped closer, trembling. "Daniel," he smiled weakly, "you once said losing everything can be a blessing. You were right. Losing everything showed me who I was, and who I never want to be again." I pulled him into my arms, holding him tight. He hugged me back, both of us crying quietly. It felt like years of pain melting away in one long embrace. "I'll always be my son," I whispered. "Always," he nodded, tears streaking his face, "and you'll always be my strength." When we finally let go, Edward wrapped his arm around both of us. For the first time, we stood together, not as broken pieces, but as a whole family finally healed. The officiant smiled. I think that was the real vow renewal right there. Everyone laughed through their tears. Even Daniel chuckled softly. The rest of the ceremony felt like magic. We ate, danced, and shared stories under the soft glow of fairy lights. Daniel played with the little kids from the foundation, helping them toss flower petals into the lake. Watching him laugh again, it was like watching my little boy come back to life. As the evening deepened, Edward stood and raised a toast. To love that lasts, to forgiveness that heals. And to second chances, because life doesn't always give them, but when it does, we must cherish them. Everyone cheered. I looked at him, my heart full, and whispered, "You've given me a lifetime in just 1 year." He smiled. "And I plan to give you many more." Later that night, when the guests were gone and the candles burned low, I sat by the lake with Edward and Daniel. The water shimmered, the moonlight dancing across its surface. Daniel broke the silence first. Mom, remember when I said you'd regret marrying him? I laughed softly. Yes, I do, he smiled. Well, I was wrong, you made the best decision of your life, Edward chuckled. It's rare to hear a son admit that, Daniel grinned. Yeah, well, I've learned a thing or two. We all laughed, a soft, genuine laugh that carried across the water. For the first time, there was no pain hiding behind it. I leaned my head on Edward's shoulder, whispering, They mocked you for being poor, Edward. But love proved richer than gold. He smiled, kissing my forehead. And now they know wealth doesn't build happiness. Love does. I looked at Daniel, who was staring at the lake, peaceful for the first time in years, and I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. If this story warmed your heart even a little, I said softly, smiling at the stars, subscribe for more true stories that remind us it's never too late to love, to forgive, and to begin again. The night grew quiet, the moon hung high, and the three of us sat there, a mother, a son, and a man who had once been mocked for his simplicity but had turned out to be the richest man I'd ever known. They laughed at us once. But love had the last laugh, and that, my dear, is the kind of wealth no one can measure.